I want to just make clear that intersectionality is not a buzzword or a synonym for diversity. It really is a necessity. So I think one of the biggest challenges is about moving beyond the surface level of commitments. I think it's like so easy for us to put out statements about DE&I, diversity, equality, or equity and inclusion, or hire a consultant or have one-off trainings that celebrate diversity in its marketing campaign. But there's something much more about that. I think it's about shifting the power and making sure it's about real inclusivity and redistributing resources. And I guess it would have to be about embedding equity into every aspect of the business. True inclusion for me is about when we start listening, and I mean really listening, active listening to people when they're marginalized, when they're vulnerable, when they're discriminated, when they're victimized. It requires brave leadership, and it requires leadership to take action even when it feels uncomfortable. So this word intersectionality, I think that it's used so much, and I want to just make clear that intersectionality is not a buzzword or a synonym for diversity. It really is a necessity. I guess it's about those compounding factors of oppressions that exist, and it means that there has to be an understanding to people's experiences of discrimination, because discrimination is not a singular way and an outlook of how we see things. As a Black queer woman in the workplace, my experiences would be different to a gay man. A disabled trans employee's experience will be very different to that of a working class migrant who happens to be a person of faith, religion, and belief. So, leaders have got to probably really recognize that this one size fits all policy approach doesn't work. I think it's about investment, the initiatives that we're talking about, and given that what's happening around the world of businesses pulling back from the commitment of DE&I, let's ask ourselves, are we defending the acronym or actually looking at what it really means about the culture, changing hearts and minds, looking at true inclusion by way of having great sponsorship and mentorship programs that bolster and uplift those that are underrepresented in the workplace. And I would just say that, it requires that culture, and you'll hear me speak about culture quite a lot, where people feel safe enough to speak up about their experiences without fear of retaliation or harm to them in the workplace. That's how people feel valued and respected, and you're able to retain great talent within your workplace. So safety for LGBTQ plus employees, I want to start by just caveating this that, LGBTQ plus people are not a monolith. So when we think about LGBTQ plus people, they happen to be Black, or they happen to be POC, which is a person of colour. They happen to be young, mature. They happen to be a person of faith. So we look at those intersections about how we keep people safe at different aspects. And I know that a lot of businesses are starting to talk about, psychological safety in the workplace. And I guess safety goes beyond policies. Again, it is about that culture, and having a great network is great. It's really good. But, if queer employees do not feel protected from discrimination or even microaggressions, then it just feels quite performative. So This has to be about creating safety and embedding inclusivity into the company's policies. And let's talk about accountability. I think when discrimination happens, it has to be addressed very swiftly. This isn't just about saying, zero tolerance, whereas I like to change that narrative about, full acceptance against all forms of discrimination. It means addressing things from the get-go, making sure that no LGBTQ plus employee has to shrink themselves to fit into a place. It's about them showing up as their full, and I don't always use authentic because it can be quite subjective, but their full professional selves without fear of being penalised. So of late, you know, I'm torn about this backlash because I've seen many businesses pull back from their stance around DE&I. And as I think about it, I think that there's this need to defend the acronym, and it's not about defending the acronym, it's about defending the work. I think when we push back on efforts of inclusion, we really will see such a crumbling of the great work that has been done. I said, but if the truth be told, I think diversity and equity and equality and inclusion benefits everyone. Companies that have inclusion at the heart of what they do perform better, and that's a known fact. They attract the top talent, they create workplaces which feel innovative. It's not just about them surviving, but it's also about them thriving. And I think those that are resisting the D&I agenda are doing it to protect boundaries, but if they're holding back, you're going to see, I guess, a dissemination and the cards falling down. I think that, leaders, and I always highlight leaders because those are the ones who have the power to change things and the influence. I would just say keep the pressure on and reaffirm your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can ensure that your workplaces feel smarter, feel linear, feel a sense of purpose in what you're doing. Just remember what side of history, her story, or even their story you want to be on.